profile of the activities that we are more engaged are mainly young people. It's the youth. So demands are, or the way they work with, it's more in that how could you say, like, they want to highlight the youth problems, like lack of access to education, unemployment, that they don't have any opportunities to develop their music or their arts, whatever. No, they don't have opportunities. But also they kind of, it's integrated into a bigger social issue. For example, if they lack of opportunities to get into education, that means that there is a structural problem, that it doesn't allow young people to go into the college or to access to education. So I think that they focus on their own demands, but that also it's a critic about society as a whole. I don't know if that was clear. Like when they say we don't have spaces for creation, they are demanding like more cultural activities, more training, more spaces that can be open for them, because sometimes they develop all their cultural expressions on the street, on the sidewalk, on a park. No, so sometimes they say, "Hey, I need a space where to do this," but that means that the government doesn't have any specific policy to address youth problems. And that's what we are trying to highlight, that we don't have an approach to young people, to gender violence, to unemployment. So I think most of the demands are related to violence, and that's a huge problem in Mexico. Like it can be gender violence, it can be institutional violence, or narco violence. That it's very difficult to face because it's a non-state violent group. How can you deal with someone that doesn't respect law? Because of course it's an outlaw. And so that I think the demands are more in how, for the government, it's stop violence, but not using violence, not using the military. But in the grassroots, it's let's empower and let's improve our communities, because government will not do that. And I think that's a very civil resistance action. It's a very civil resistant thought, way of thinking. Like government will want to come here to solve our problems. We have to do it ourselves. And that's why a lot of community projects have come out in the last years, just because of that, because they realize that the government will not solve anything for us. That if we don't do by ourselves, no one will do. So yeah, I think it's more in that sense. And the demands that I said, like the land protection, anti-militarization, and women's rights.
So I think I'm hearing you say that you're kind of working more in constructive engagement, parallel institution building, working on community solutions, because you don't really have a lot of faith that demands to a government entity would do much. And so people are, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, questions, comments? Yela? Do you have something?
Yeah, I have a question to Poncho. Poncho, the issue of domestic violence is all over the world, and of course it's grown everywhere with this COVID-19. And so you said you are already dealing with it and finding ways of dealing with it. And can we learn a bit more about how, especially inside the houses and the killings and stuff like that?
Yeah, in domestic violence, it's so hard because it starts with the women that don't want to like to complain or to demand their husbands or their sexual partner, whatever. And so it's more like kind of face-to-face working. So there are now some feminist groups that are doing more like these, how you say, like a company and some kind of contention, and they are creating refuge, like kind of places where they can take their children to stay for a while, and by the time they can fix the situation in the house, or they can do something. But there is so hard to. That's what I said. The feminist movement, it's very focused on protests, in public policy, in demanding to the government. But the problem is that the perpetrator of violence, it's inside the house. It's a very domestic issue, and some women doesn't want to denounce violence because of fear, because of the family networks that already exist, and they, the fear that this can be destroyed, the reputation. There are many cultural aspects there in domestic violence, but it's more what I know is these feminist groups are doing more like one-to-one peer company to help these women. It's as far as I know, but it's very hard. I think that's the main problem with domestic violence. We can do and protest as much as we want, but the problem is inside the houses. So this way of action, of direct action, the typical protest, doesn't work on domestic violence. They have to do a different approach, because going to the streets to demand that our husbands stop beating us, it doesn't make sense. It starts in the house, I think.
If I may, we are trying to get into our protests also religious leaders and community leaders who are men to protest with us against the domestic violence. And so in such a way, we are trying to change the discourse about making a woman behave and shaming the men. And hopefully, and it's slow, but this is what we're trying to do. And I'm talking there's killings among the Jewish women, there's more killings among the Arab women, and it's very difficult to get the male community leaders to join us during these protests that we do. But we approach them personally. I mean, it's my job to go and talk to the Bedouin leaders, and they're also religious leaders, to the Bedouin Islamic religious leaders, the men, to come and stand publicly against domestic violence. And in the Muslim world, or in the Arab world, not Muslim, sorry, in our Arab world, it's honor killings, like, oh God, you went out and spoke to somebody, and so therefore for the honor of my family, I must kill you, type of thing. And then if we have the religious leaders say there's no honor in killing, and this is one of our statements, we're hoping, look, we haven't made any good leeways, but I'm telling you what we're trying to do. So you need to really try and think how you use the outside protest to make the difference inside it.
What? Yeah, there's some. I will last word. This special feature of this is that it's a separatist one. They don't want to include women. Don't want to include men in their struggle. They don't want us there. They don't want us in the protests. They don't want us in the rallies. They don't want us in their spaces. They are creating separatist spaces, separatist protests, everything. So what we are doing as men, we are creating like kind of circles of reflection groups, self-help groups of masculinities. So the toxic masculinity, violent masculinities, new masculinities. So the idea is to, okay, women have their struggle and they have the job to do, but we also have our own job to do. And that's to control our self-violence that comes from the building of masculinity. And in Mexico, the macho culture is very strong. And we grew up and we raised in a very machista culture. So now we are doing more like in small spaces with men that wants to do something against gender violence, is to help other men to control their violence, to think about their emotions, to know how to express better, to deal with conflicts and communicate in better ways. So I think it's more like in this sense that we are working with men. Like, hey, let's think about our own violence, because women are being empowered, but we are not changing our minds. So it's that movement, and also feminists have pushed that. Like, hey guys, you have a job to do with yourselves. Do it. And then the masculinity movement start.
Great, thank you. Francis, I think, had a comment. Go ahead, Francis.
Okay, thank you. Maybe a comment or a suggestion or an advice. I don't know how I will put it, but I need to understand that I like the component you were talking about. The component of we're trying to link the online discussions and the offline discussion, keeping in mind the COVID epidemic. So that's why it's forcing you to think an option of the online discussion. But I think I don't know that if that's happening in other parts of the world. But I think in African countries, mostly in Kenya, the component of online discussion is solely run by the middle class. The middle class. Currently, a lot of middle class people have joined into activism because they are forced to do that because COVID has forced them to lose their jobs and they have to stay at home. They have no money, so they are, by circumstances, are forced to be in the activism. Therefore, bullying other activism. So I don't know how you're doing when you're doing this discussion. How will you sustain to make sure that these people get mobilizing on the online who are only doing that because they have lost their job or they have missed something? How will you manage to sustain that? And number two, how do you make sure that if they get their jobs or if everything comes to normal, they'll not abandon the struggle? I need to understand that because I'm very sure on the grassroots part of it it's working, but at the online part of it, the joining aspect, I think I'm getting a challenge because most of them in Kenya, they're doing this because they have lost their job and they have nothing to do. So they think like, let's join other people in advocacy for the struggle. Thank you.
Thank you. May I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's true. It's online activism. It's a privilege for middle class, for educated people, and not only because they went to school, because also how to use technology requires some developing some skills that not everybody has. Maybe you can have a smartphone, but you don't know how to use some technologies and not for movements or some application or whatever. So it's not that easy. It's not, and we have to think after this pandemic to continue in the grassroots. We cannot miss and forget to work on the communities, to work in the ground, in the field, in that level. Because if we think that we will solve everything just online, I don't. I think will be very difficult. I mean, we have to create our own Google. We have to create our own platforms. We have to create our own system, basically, as China is doing. But well, it's a big discussion.
Thank you. Oleniki, you're next, then Miriam, and then I'm going to ask if Fikiri wants to say something as well, since he's also working with this, with men and boys to try to deal with domestic violence with women, and then we'll head on to the next presentation. Okay, we'll have 45 minutes left. So go ahead, Oleniki.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vedran, too.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I just wanted to make a comment about the issue of gender-based violence and then the approach in Mexico. Because when you're talking about gender equality and women's empowerment, you know, and the feminism aspect and all that, I think there's a need for a balance to be struck, because you cannot address a problem with a problem. You know, we have to be kind of solution-oriented in our approach. So if the women are working separately and the men are working separately, I'm wondering where there will be a cause need. I think there needs to be a meeting point, and I think maybe the situation in Mexico is such that there is a need for maybe certain groups to begin to walk in that direction to bridge whatever gap is making the women just want to isolate themselves and do their own thing.
Any response, Poncho?
Yeah. Well, I don't think women are being isolated if they want their own space. Actually, I think they are being empowered and fearless and creating different way of politics that the male thinking has done all over this time. I mean, the male way of thinking is one, and I think the female way of thinking is another. So political creativity in the female way of thinking, I think it's very different from the masculine side. So when they have their own way, their own spaces for organizing, for creating the tactics, for strategizing, for whatever, I think they are being more empowered and not. Sometimes they are being isolated. Yes, many men are like, hey guys, we want to join you, we want to support, but you are very intolerant. You don't want any men in the movement. You are feminazis and all this kind of criticism against the feminist movement that has been done a lot of the people in the society. Because also a problem with this feminist movement is that they did a lot of very radical actions like destruction of property, burning of buildings or whatever. So that makes, more controversial, like what is going on now in the US with the protests. And all over the world always happen that, the radical flanks, and also happen in the feminists. So yeah, that divides society, but I don't think that if they have their own spaces and they are a separatist movement, that's a lack or something that one can weaken them. I actually think that that's strong in them, but they have to think how to create a coalition.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, they will be isolated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Miriam, do you want to ask your question, or do you want him to just read it? I know you've typed it as well.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Catherine. Poncho, thank you so much for sharing so much information. I'm so happy to see you also. I am very interested to know how you're applying the feminist lens to all of this great work that you're doing with these three groups. And then I have one more question. I'm not sure if it has been answered in the previous calls because I couldn't attend the previous one with you, I think. But I'm interested to know, what are some specific roadblocks that you're facing in terms of specific suppressive or oppressive policies that have been, that have been placed by the government or state on the movement support work that you are doing. Any sanctions that you're facing and they're serving as a roadblock for the movement support work that you are doing. And I'm happy to repeat the question or write the question in chat.
Okay. Yeah, that last question was a bit difficult for me to get.
I think the main thing, Poncho, the last one was she was talking about the repression from either the regime or from the non-state actors for your work or for people's work close. Are there any sanctions? Are they threatening you? That kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well.
As well as the feminist lens.
The first question is how to apply feminist perspective. I think in the critique of violence, we are, of course, taking totally the feminist perspective about how masculinity, it's also part of our culture. And if its culture became behavior, and then we are thinking about this symbolic violence from a feminist perspective, that it's how to change the foundations of our society. So the feminist perspective is helping us a lot, specifically in the sense of dealing with emotions and a different relationship with our bodies. And that was very interesting from the feminist perspective, how to think as men, how to deal with our feelings, how to express, how to communicate, and how to rethink all the preconceptions that we have as male and as female. No, like, oh, I have to be strong, or I cannot do this or that. So this is being very criticized. And in this side of the world, it's changing a lot. really, really. Men are changing a lot of people, you know, like, and also it's very strong, the gay movement here in Mexico. Lots of the same-sex marriage has been legal in Mexico City since almost 10 years. So we have a very progressive legislation and government in that. In some sense, we have abortion, free abortion, and legal and free abortion in Mexico City since almost 10 years ago. Legal same-sex marriage in different states of Mexico. And now we have a very progressive government. And actually, with the Black Bloc burning down police stations, the feminists burning down police stations and destroying police stations in Mexico City, they were not caught. They were not even beaten by the police. Nothing happened. Nothing with the feminist movement. So this, why? Because the governor of Mexico City is a woman, and from this very progressive new party that it's in the government. So they want to give like a nice facade, like, hey guys, we are with you. We are women and we respect women's rights. So then we will allow you to go and to protest and to destroy whatever you want, because yeah, we are women as you. And so I think also these can be very tricky in social movements, how government can use us. For example, some very right-wing parties were supporting the feminist movement. No, so it's crazy. Like the right-wing parties were supporting the demonstrations, the feminists, the whatever. So it's very hard to balance. I hope that answered.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very interesting. Thank you for sharing that story.
Hey, thank you, Mariam. I'm also happy to see you and to talk with you after a long time.
Great. Okay. Let's see, Kiri, I'm going to have you. We're actually getting to the end of the time for Poncho's part, but I do want to say hello to Edna. It's her first time on the call. She's an amazing activist from Cameroon. So Edna, do you want to just say hello and mute?
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Edna.
Yeah, I always had to struggle with the time difference. Because right now I'm in the US, and you know, when I look at the time, I think I'm in Cameroon. So I will be like, okay, this thing is at 5 p.m. I'm like, I only had to catch up. It's horrible. Yes, I'm fine.
Glad to have
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so Sekiri, do you have one more question or comment for Poncho? And then we need to get started on our next presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also, you know, just to congratulate Poncho for his very amazing work. Poncho, I think the last time we saw each other was in Boston in 2016.
Yes.
So it's really amazing to hear, because me also, I'm working on this issue of how can we engage men in the fight for gender equality, because my country also is a very patriarchal country with deeply rooted gender norms and you know, cultural practices against women. So what we are trying to do, the approach we are using is a bottom-up approach, because in the government we know that the government tried to use a very different approach, trying to, for example, when it comes to women's representation, they use, we have gender quotas, which apply only at the government level, the parliament level. But when you check at the grassroots level, women's representation is, you know, almost inexistent in the local councils. And I think this is a government, you know, approach to not to frustrate men, especially male members of the community, especially those from local level, because most of them are uneducated. And it's in local communities where gender-based violence or these kind of cultural practices happen a lot. So what we try to do is to work with the people from local communities, bring men and women together for, you know, weekly meetings where they talk, you know, speak openly. They are given this opportunity to raise their concerns, to speak about what is not going on, and together to take common actions, decisions, and action. So I think bringing everybody together and also using this community-driven approach to gender-based violence and gender discrimination is really amazing. You bring everybody together, they talk and also take common decisions, and together they work towards, you know, bringing about solutions and positive change. Yeah, so really amazing work, and I'm really glad to hear that Poncho is also doing such kind of work as well in Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fikri. It's really nice listening to you. And just to say about what you're saying, it's true. We have to work with women in the very grassroots, because it's in that place where we can start doing this politicization of them. And well, maybe Africa and Mexico, we have like a gap in that sense, because now we have like lots of women, specifically with this new government, lots of women in very high level positions. Actually, the governor of Mexico City, it's a woman. It's a woman, not right now. So yeah, there's some shift right now in Mexico in that way. But violence is not changing. Actually, it's increasing. So we have to think that, because sometimes when women are getting empowered, machos are getting angry and you know, and more violent. So we also have, we have to think on that, how machos respond to gender empowerment.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
because even in Burundi, just want to comment. For 15 years now, the country introduced gender quotas for women's representation in the government and the parliament. And for 15 years, we've had, you know, the highest women's representation ever in government and parliament. And for 15 years, people were thinking that those women at the top would influence positive change in the area of women's rights and all these kind of gender-based violence and discrimination. But 15 years later, we are still, you know, almost the same. We still have the same discriminatory laws. We still have the same cultural practices against women. So we think this top-down approach that they used for 15 years is not really working. So we need to think a different perspective, the bottom-up approach to empower women at a local level, and to see how they can try to influence their own lives, but also to include men as well from local level. So I think this is a new approach in many places. We've seen this working, and we believe it is also working because we've seen already a positive change happening in local communities.
Okay, thank you.
Wow.
And again, thank you so much, Poncho, for really great discussion and presentation, and keep having input.